Mara Voss had spent most of her life standing just outside the light, not in darkness, not in misery, but in that quiet in-between space where people like her always seemed to end up. She was the one who refilled the glasses before anyone noticed they were empty. She was the one who remembered birthdays, fixed broken things, and stayed behind to clean up after the celebrations ended. She did not resent it. She had simply accepted it as the shape of her life. Her sister Alara was the sun. Everyone said so, and everyone meant it as a compliment. Alara was tall, graceful, and spoke in a way that made people feel like the most important person in the room. She had their mother's sharp instincts and their late father's easy charm. She walked into rooms, and things shifted around her, the way furniture rearranges itself to face a window. Mara had watched this her whole life, with something that was not envy and not admiration, but a complicated mixture of both, that she had never found the right word for. They lived in a community that most of the world did not know existed. Wolf-shifters had built their lives quietly, alongside human cities for generations, governed by pack law and ancient traditions that went back further than any written record. Mara and Alara had grown up in one of the smaller, respected families of the southern pack. Their mother, Sylvia, was a proud woman who had raised her daughters with a clear understanding of their roles. Alara was being prepared for something great. Mara was being prepared to help her get there. When the news came that Alpha King Dorian Vale was looking for a new mate, Sylvia did not sleep for 3 days. She planned, calculated, and dressed Alara in silver for the formal gathering where the king would meet the eligible women of all 4 packs. Mara attended as a family representative, wearing a plain dark dress she had owned for years. She sat near the back. She passed trays of food when asked. She smiled when smiled at, and faded when it was appropriate to fade. Dorian Vale was not what she had expected. She had imagined someone louder. Kings in stories were always loud. But he moved through the room with a kind of contained stillness, like a river that runs deep and fast beneath a calm surface. He was not unkind and not warm. He was measured. He looked at people the way someone looks at a map, carefully, seriously, trying to understand the terrain. He spoke to Alara for nearly 40 minutes. Mara watched from across the room and thought that her sister was extraordinary at this, the performance of being exactly what someone needed her to be. Alara laughed at the right moments and said serious things at the right moments, and the king nodded and seemed genuinely engaged. Mara looked away. She went to help a staff member who had dropped a stack of napkins near the kitchen door. That was when she heard a voice behind her. "You do not have to do that," the voice said. "You are a guest." She turned around. It was him. The king was crouching beside her, picking up napkins from the floor, with the same serious expression he had worn all evening, as though this was simply a task that needed doing. "Neither do you," she said, before she had thought about it. He looked at her then, not the polite, scanning look he had given most people in the room. Something different, something that paused. "Fair point," he said. They handed the napkins to the staff member together, and that was it. He returned to the gathering. She returned to the back of the room. She told herself it was nothing. Because it was nothing. 6 weeks of formal courtship followed. Dorian came to their home twice a week. Alara was always perfectly prepared. Mara was always somewhere nearby, arranging flowers or confirming arrival times, or making sure the kitchen had what it needed. Once, during a dinner, the electricity went out across the whole block. Alara and Dorian had been in the sitting room with their mother. The candles were in the kitchen. Mara went to find them. Dorian had the same idea. They stood in the dark kitchen together for a moment, before she found the matches. She lit 2 candles and set them on the counter. He leaned against the doorframe and looked at her in a way that was different from how people usually looked at her. "You organized this entire evening," he said. It was not a question. "My mother and I," she said. "Your mother told me what to order at dinner. You had already arranged for the things she forgot." Mara did not respond to that. "You are quieter than your sister," he said. "Most people are. That is not a criticism." She looked at him. The candlelight made the kitchen feel smaller than it was. "I know," she said. They talked for 40 minutes while the power was out. Not about pack politics or lineage, or the future of the 4 territories. They talked about small things. She mentioned that she had been teaching herself to repair old clocks because she found the mechanics calming. He said that he had not done anything purely for calm in a very long time. She asked him what he used to do before he became king. He said he used to run. Just run, for miles, without a destination. "Do you miss it?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. The power came back on. He straightened, nodded at her once, in a way that felt like more than a nod, and walked back to the sitting room. Mara stood in the bright kitchen and breathed. 3 days later, he announced his engagement to Alara. The house erupted into joy. Their mother wept happy tears. Alara accepted the news with a composure that looked like grace, but was really a kind of triumphant relief. Mara hugged her sister and said she was thrilled and meant at least part of it. She went to bed that night and lay in the dark and thought about nothing in particular for a very long time. The bonding ceremony was scheduled for the following month. It was the most sacred ritual in pack tradition. The Alpha King and his chosen mate would stand at the ancient stone altar before all 4 packs, speak the old words, and wait for the king's wolf to seal the bond. The wolf did not lie. It could not be convinced or negotiated with. It either recognized the mate or it did not. Everyone assumed it would recognize Alara. Of course it would. She was the obvious choice. She had been prepared her entire life to stand at that altar. Mara stood at the edge of the crowd on the day of the ceremony, near the back of the vast outdoor assembly. Hundreds of pack members had gathered. The elders sat in a formal row. Children sat on their parents' shoulders to see. The stone altar at the center was very old, smoothed by generations of hands, and carved with symbols that predated written language. Alara was stunning. She wore white and silver, and her hair was arranged in an elaborate style that had taken 3 hours. She stood at the altar with her chin raised and her hands steady. Dorian stood across from her in formal dark clothing, his expression as composed as always. The elder began the words. The crowd fell completely silent. Dorian spoke his part clearly and without hesitation. Then they waited. Nothing happened. The silence stretched. Mara saw Dorian close his eyes. She saw the tension move through his jaw. He tried again, the way you try a door a second time even though you know it is locked, just because you cannot quite believe it. Still nothing. Alara's composure began to slip at the edges. Just slightly. Just enough for someone who knew her well to see. And then something happened that Mara had not expected, and would spend the rest of her life trying to find the right words for. She felt something. A pull. Not physical. Not like someone grabbing her arm, but internal, like the feeling of a compass needle swinging into alignment, warm and certain, and completely involuntary. Dorian opened his eyes. He did not look at Alara. He looked directly at Mara. Across the entire crowd, through hundreds of people, he found her immediately, as though he had known exactly where she was standing. She watched his expression change, not into something dramatic, into something quiet. Into something that looked like recognition. The crowd saw it, all of it. The direction of his gaze, the stillness of the moment, the way the elder's mouth opened and did not form words. Pack law was very clear. A wolf rejection could not be argued against. A king whose wolf refused the bond could not complete the ceremony. The elder stepped forward and spoke the formal words that suspended the proceedings. Everything that followed moved quickly, and also seemed to last forever. The ceremony was halted. The ride home was silent. Alara sat with her hands folded in her lap and said nothing for the entire journey. Their mother said a great many things. She said them quietly at first, and then not quietly. Mara sat by the window and watched the trees pass, and did not defend herself, because there was nothing to defend. She had not done anything. She did not know how to explain that. She did not try. At home, alone in her room, she sat on her bed and stared at the wall. She thought about the king finding her eyes across that crowd. She thought about the kitchen and the candlelight. She thought about what she had always known about herself, which was that she was not the kind of woman things happened to. She was the kind of woman who made sure things went smoothly for other people. Apparently, she had been wrong about that. 3 days passed. She heard through careful, quiet channels that Dorian was managing the political fallout across all 4 packs. There were meetings with elders. There were formal statements. There were families and alliances that needed careful attention. She respected this. She understood that being king was not the same as being free. On the fourth morning, she heard a knock at the front door of the family house. Her mother was out. Ilara had already begun the process of leaving, boxes appearing in the hallway each day like a slow tide pulling back from shore. Mara opened the door. Dorian Vale stood on the step alone. No guards at the gate, no formal car at the curb. He was wearing ordinary clothes, and he looked like a man who had not slept very well for several days. "May I come in?" he asked. She stepped back and let him in. They sat at the small kitchen table, the same one she had grown up eating every meal at, and they talked for a long time. He told her that he had not understood what he was looking at during the courtship months. He told her that he had followed the expected path because it seemed right and correct and politically sound, and because he had not let himself pay attention to something he should have paid more attention to. He said this plainly and without excuse. She listened to all of it. "I am not a second choice," she said when he finished. Her voice was calm. "I need you to understand that before anything else. Whatever you are thinking about doing, whatever you are going to say next, I need you to understand that first." He looked at her steadily. "You were never the second choice. I was looking at the wrong thing. I did not understand what I was looking at until my wolf refused to pretend otherwise." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, a bird was making a small, persistent sound in the tree near the window. "I need time," she said. "I need to think." He nodded. "Take whatever you need." She took 2 weeks. She did not spend them waiting passively. She spoke with an elder she trusted, a woman who had known her family for 30 years. She wrote down everything she was thinking, filling a notebook she bought specifically for the purpose, and she read it back to herself to check for clarity. She thought about Ilara, about the complicated grief of a relationship damaged by something neither of them had chosen, about how long repair takes, and whether it is always possible. She thought about herself, about who she was when no one needed her to be anything in particular, about the clocks she repaired, about the runs she took alone early in the morning before the rest of the world was awake, about the things she wanted that she had never said out loud to anyone. At the end of 2 weeks, she sent word that she was ready to speak. They met at a neutral location, a quiet park at the edge of the city where pack families sometimes gathered. She told him her terms. She would not be a decoration or a symbol or a diplomatic convenience. She expected a real voice in decisions that affected the packs she would serve. She expected honesty, even when it was difficult, especially when it was difficult. She expected to be treated like someone whose thoughts were worth the trouble of hearing. He agreed. Not quickly, the way someone agrees to get through a conversation, but thoughtfully, the way someone agrees because they actually mean it. The second ceremony was small, dawn light over the stone altar, 4 elders, the immediate households, no crowd. Mara wore a deep blue dress she had chosen herself. She had done her own hair. She stood at the altar and looked at Dorian across the old carved stone, and felt something very simple and very true. The elder began the words. Dorian spoke his part. Mara spoke hers. This time, before the words were even finished, the wolf rose. There was no performance in it, no dramatic display, just a warmth that spread outward from the altar and settled over everyone present like the first real warmth of spring after a long and difficult winter. An elder who had witnessed more ceremonies than she could count stood with tears on her face and said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. In the year that followed, Mara worked. She established a mediation structure between the 4 packs that had been a source of quiet tension for over a decade. She learned names, histories, and old grievances. She fixed things that had been broken for a long time, not dramatically, not publicly, but with the same steady competence she had always applied to every task she ever took on. She sent Ilara a letter on her birthday. She did not know if it was read. She sent one the year after. She would keep sending them. One evening, Dorian found her at her desk, going over correspondence. He stood in the doorway for a moment before she looked up. "The Eastern Elder told me today that you are the most practical person she has ever dealt with in 40 years of pack service," he said. Mara considered this. Is that a compliment? From her, it is the highest one she knows how to give. She smiled and turned back to her papers. She did not need the kingdom to understand her, but she was glad, in the quiet and honest part of herself that she kept carefully and did not often show, that it was slowly beginning to. Some things take time, the right things usually do.